White House visitor logs show Parkinson's expert Dr. Kevin Cannard visited at least 8 times to the White House in 8 months. But Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre would not say his name, would not give us any answers, would not answer if he was at the White House to see President Biden. Now, later, the doctor, the White House physician, put out a letter, confirmed he had been there, and explained all of the nuances while saying unequivocally the President of the United States does not have Parkinson's. Let's bring in Texas Congressman and former White House physician Ronny Jackson. Perfect person to speak with. I thought of you so many times yesterday as the White House doctor to Obama and to Trump, so let's just call you a bipartisan doctor. I thought of you as Karine Jean-Pierre gave this reason for why she could not answer questions about public White House logs.
The medical unit hosts a wide range of specialists, from dermatologists to neurologists, and so I cannot speak to every person because there's actually a security reasons to protect their privacy. For security reasons, we cannot share names. We cannot share names. There are security reasons. It is out of security reason, is out of protecting someone's privacy. I'm just not going to do that out of security reasons, out of privacy.
You are the president's doctor. Are there security reasons that you can't talk about public records?
Absolutely not, Kelly. That's a ridiculous excuse, and the whole world can see right through it. There's no security. He was on the visitors' logs. It's a public document. It's public now. We know that Dr. Cannard came to the residence medical clinic at the bidding of Dr. Kevin O'Connor, who is the president's physician. That's what we know. What we don't know is who he saw there. Now, he went to the residence clinic, and a lot of people don't understand this. You know this, but there are 2 separate clinics there. There's a clinic in the Eisenhower Executive Office building, which is separate from the White House, and that's where everyone who's not a member of the First Family is expected to go get their care if they need to be seen. And it's possible that Dr. Cannard was coming in and he's seeing patients there, but he was waved into the residence clinic. The residence clinic is on the ground floor of the White House, directly below the president's bedroom, and it's reserved for care of the First Family. So if he was seen there, and if Dr. O'Connor summoned him to be seen there, our question is, who was he seeing there? Was he seeing the president, right? And she's claiming it's security, I guess patient privacy or something, but if you saw someone besides the president, just tell us that, okay? Have Dr. O'Connor come down to the podium and say that. But the question is, did he or did he not see the president? Because he is a neurologist who specializes in Parkinson's disease and movement disorders. And the sad truth is, the whole world knows that there's something wrong with this president. He's broken, right? And maybe it's not Parkinson's. He said it's not Parkinson's, but it's very Parkinson's-like. It's some other type of movement disorder and some other serious cognitive issue. We need to know what's going on. We need to know what he's being treated for. And if Dr. Cannard saw him in the residence clinic, which the records indicate that he did, we need to know that that happened, and we need to know why that happened. This is not a privacy issue anymore. This is our commander-in-chief. This is a national security issue. And if this man is not leading our country and he's not capable of doing so, the world and the country needs to know that.
So, Dr. Jackson, here's the question. John Levine, New York Post, he was the first person who reported this, not the New York Times. They got on the bandwagon. It was the New York Post. And here's the question he wanted asked yesterday. On January 17th, 2024, there was a meeting between 4 people in the White House residence clinic, which you have described well. And he lists Dr. O'Connor, the president's doctor, Dr. Cannard, the specialist from Walter Reed, Dr. Atwood, and a 4th undisclosed person. As press secretary, I could not have sauntered into the president's residence and into his private clinic. That wouldn't have been possible. A small universe could be that 4th person. Who could have been that 4th person? List off the names.
I don't know exactly who it could have been. It was obviously a visitor who was outside. It wasn't a badge holder. They wouldn't have been listed on the visitor's log. I suspect it was another physician that was coming in to help. Maybe it was somebody from George Washington University, because Dr. O'Connor has credentials there as well. So maybe he brought somebody in that wasn't from Walter Reed. Maybe it was another specialist that would have been also identified as a Parkinson's specialist or something that was consulting. Now, Dr. O'Connor said he hasn't been seen by a neurologist since his physical exam. Maybe that's true. Maybe, he had his physical exam done like we know he did at Walter Reed, and maybe they were there consulting with Dr. O'Connor, who's continuing to treat him for whatever's going on. But I suspect it was probably another medical professional that would have been readily identified. We've obviously pretty quickly identified Dr. Cannard, but Dr. Cannard has a bit of a history at the White House Medical Unit. Someone who doesn't have a medical history, that's from another university medical center of some sort, who is a specialist in that area. That's all I can speculate, because if they didn't disclose the name, it was somebody they were worried about being identified as seeing Dr. O'Connor in the residence clinic.
Last question for you, Dr. Jackson. Correct me if I'm wrong, you did not have a close, intimate relationship with Obama before you started your job, nor did you have that with Trump. You were a doctor. Politico reporting today that the president's personal doctor, Kevin O'Connor, is a family intimate and one-time business associate of the president's brother. And they point to the conflict here. We're trying to get accurate information. I'm not suggesting O'Connor's not giving that to us. However, being so close and intimate with your patient, all the way back to the vice presidency, does that worry you at all?
Well, it worries me now. You know, when he was taking care of the Vice President Biden, he was on active duty. He was an Army colonel. He was taking care of him. But he got very close to him, and especially close to Jill Biden during that time. He essentially became part of the Biden family. And then when he left and went to work at GW as a civilian, retired from the military, they obviously brought him back in as their physician because they trust him. But I promise you, he will say or do anything that he has to do to cover for the Biden family. He is part of the Biden family, and we know now he's probably been involved in some of their business dealings. And so I personally don't, and having known him personally for a long time, I would not trust him.
Wow. Congressman Jackson, straight from the horse's mouth. Thank you. Your insight, brilliant and interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
Julie, I mean, and not only that, the Parkinson's expert, he's a Biden donor.
Yes, this is what I wanted to touch on, and you read my mind. Dr. Kennard is a Biden donor. He's also a Parkinson's expert. A Parkinson's expert is essentially a neurologist. A neurologist is there to evaluate the doctor. There's obviously a trust issue here, right? They brought this person in who they know is a Biden donor, who's not going to go and tell. So he's been in there evaluating him allegedly 8 times in 8 months. That's once a month. That is not normal. No doctor is going to get an annual physical done by a neurologist unless there are signs, clear signs that the family are well aware of. In other words, more of a cover-up from the administration that he has been not only displaying cognitive decline, but perhaps neurological disease, not necessarily Parkinson's disease. Dr. Kennard can examine more than just Parkinson's disease. It's a neurological defect overall.
Yeah, Lee.
When this administration started, I remember at the White House press briefing room, there was a declaration that there would be an open, transparent, honest conversation from that podium. And now we're getting anything but. I don't know at any other point in my lifetime where there's been this lack of transparency from that podium. Mm-hmm. There was a point where Americans were watching and saying, we want this information because we want to know if President Biden has cognitive decline. We think because we see this and that. Now we've reached a point where Americans, they've decided on their own. They see with their own eyes. Now it's about the White House deciding whether or not they're going to push back on what Americans are concluding for themselves. They should be releasing the information for themselves if they want another term.
Yeah, Ed O'Keefe and Karine Jean-Pierre got into it yesterday. And, you know, Ed said, we're miffed. He used the word miffed. That's some strong language. And he's talking about the press corps because they have been lied to. They have not been transparent at all. So my question is, like, you have Alex Thompson from Axios, who has done this incredible reporting, and he didn't just start doing investigative journalism. He's been doing it for months and years. Where has the rest of the press corps been? Why haven't they been looking at these logs and comparing names and asking questions? Why didn't they do that 2 years ago when they could have had an appropriate primary process? So they have all been covering for the president, and none of these people should act surprised. But I think Alex would be a great person to lead other journalists going forward. Absolutely. This is how you ask questions. This is how you vet sources. This is how you report.
And let's hope it continues. We will see if it does.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.